B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, November 8th, 2019. To expose or not to expose? That is the question today. Inside the Washington Beltway, it appears that it's widely known who the CIA whistleblower is who wrote the complaint about Trump's phone call with President Zelensky of Ukraine back on July 25th. And I've decided that even though I know it, I am not going to share it with you today. I will give you indications of where you can find it if you're so inclined. But at this point, I believe that exposing the whistleblower's identity is a political tactic by Trump and the Republicans, and it's one that I don't wish to aid and abet. Now, first up, it appears that Ivanka has gone rogue on the question of identifying the whistleblower. Ivanka said, quote, "It's not particularly relevant to know the identity of the whistleblower." I'm not sure what the framing of her argument is, and I'm sure that Daddy's going to put her on his lap. And, well, I don't know what he'll do after that. Interesting information piece at The Guardian today. Under the current Whistleblower Protection Act passed in 1998 and the Intelligence Authorization Act of 2010, the provisions that should protect intelligence whistleblowers are general and subject to multiple interpretations. The Inspector General is barred from releasing a whistleblower's name, but other government officials are not explicitly prohibited from doing so. Federal laws also only govern federal employees' treatment of whistleblowers. The media and private individuals are not barred from revealing whistleblowers' names, though news organizations have overwhelmingly been refraining to do so. And here's a quote from Lewis Clark, Executive Director and CEO of the Government Accountability Project. "With this whistleblower right now, this person's testimony isn't even necessary at this point, so there is no reason whatsoever for the identity to be revealed." Now, I'm not sure I agree with that, because I do think that, in fairness to Trump, if these impeachment proceedings spring from the whistleblower complaint, then ultimately that has to be part of the record. And as you know, I'm dubious about the actual role of this individual and the use of whistleblower channels to reveal this information that is so damaging to Trump. So if you want to find the information about this individual, he's a 33-year-old graduate of Yale. At least that's what is being put forward by Real Clear Investigations. That is the right-wing reporting arm of Real Clear Politics, which is a generally neutral data site about elections and polling. And under the byline of Paul Sperry at Real Clear Investigations on October 30th, they identified this 33-year-old male as a registered Democrat held over from the Obama White House. He worked with Joe Biden and former CIA Director John Brennan. It was Brennan who assigned him initially to the White House. And he left his National Security Council posting in mid-2017 amid concerns about negative leaks to the media. Now, this is all unconfirmed according to Real Clear Investigations. He has since returned to CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. So an anonymous source at the attributed to an NSC official, a former NSC official, that's National Security Council, says he was accused of working against Trump and leaking against Trump. No verification or other backup for that whatsoever. Also, this individual reportedly huddled for guidance with the staff of the House Intelligence Committee, including former colleagues also held over from the Obama era, whom Schiff's office had recently recruited from the National Security Council. So they're showing a kind of collusion on the part of Adam Schiff. And Adam Schiff has been caught lying about the origins of contacts with the whistleblower. I don't have allegations that Schiff personally met with this individual before it all surfaced. but it does appear his staff did, and that Schiff was not forthcoming about it. So I'm sharing this information because I believe it will become the basis for a presidential tweet storm that could erupt this weekend. Other allegations include that the whistleblower back in 2016 worked with Alexandra Chalupa, the Ukrainian-American who supported Hillary Clinton, did opposition research, including making contacts in Ukraine. Then they quote Fred Fleitz, a former CIA analyst, a buddy of Trump's. Everyone knows who he is. CNN knows, the Post knows, the Times knows, Congress knows, the White House knows, even the president knows who he is. And Fleitz asserted they're hiding him because of his political bias. Federal records show that Biden's office invited this man to an October 2016 state luncheon with the Italian Prime Minister. And I don't know why that is reported as something important here, but now you know. This Yale graduate is said to speak Russian and Ukrainian as well as Arabic. So these details, I think, are interesting, and I think you are going to see a smear campaign mounted to force the outing of the whistleblower in order to attack him further. And because of that, I am not going to get into the game here and give you his name, but I'm not trying to play coy, and you can go to Real Clear Investigations and find out more for yourselves. Meanwhile, my colleague Jeff Schechtman, podcast colleague over at Who, What, Why, has an interview up today with scholar Allison Stanger, who argues that only whistleblowers can save democracy. I've linked to it at whowhatwhy.org, and you can check it out at your convenience. So today we got more transcripts released from witnesses who will be testifying in the open hearings of the impeachment operation run by Adam Schiff at the Intelligence Committee starting next Wednesday. And the two releases came from Fiona Hill, who was Trump's former advisor on Russia and Europe at the National Security Council, and the top Ukraine expert at the NSC, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Now, I quibble with the way they're doing this because we've already had key testimony from these individuals that has leaked. And now they're publishing the full statements, and then these individuals will be called to testify in public, and they're going to repeat the same assertions. Now, maybe this is a way of getting people to pay attention and drilling this information into the minds, the mushy minds of Americans. But at any rate, the latest highlights from Fiona Hill's testimony, well, she talked about her boss, John Bolton, who called Giuliani a hand grenade. Quote, Rudy Giuliani is a hand grenade that is going to blow everybody up. He made it clear, Bolton did, that he didn't feel there was anything he could personally do about this. Then Colonel Vindman is backing up the claims that there was a quid pro quo. It was a demand that Ukrainians deliver these investigations in order to get what they've been looking for, which is the presidential meeting. And Hill went on to say that the moment she started working on Trump's National Security Council, she was subjected to the same kind of mishmash of conspiracy theories aimed at Marie Yovanovitch, the former ambassador to Ukraine. She was called an ally of George Soros. That really hurts, doesn't it? And her loyalty to Trump was doubted. Hill does not believe Ukraine meddled in the 2016 election. And Vindman, who was very strong in his testimony when challenged by Republican John Ratcliffe of Texas. Ratcliffe trying to give Trump weasel room, saying, he only asked him for a favor. And Vindman said, when the President of the United States makes a request for a favor, I would take it as a demand. Vindman said this was about getting a White House meeting. It was a demand for him to fulfill this particular prerequisite to get the meeting. Vindman again, it became completely apparent what the deliverable would be in order to get a White House meeting. That was reinforced by the president. The demand was, in order to get the White House meeting, they had to deliver an investigation. And he also quibbled with the details of the non-transcript, the memo of the conversation that was released by the White House, and they claim it's complete, it's perfect, as Trump said. Now, we're also learning from the Fiona Hill testimony that at one meeting where Gordon Sondland, the ambassador to the European Union, and I believe John Bolton was also present, that Sondland blurted out that Mick Mulvaney, the acting permanent White House chief of staff, had approved a meeting with the Ukrainians if they announced an investigation of Burisma, the company where Hunter Biden had been on the board. Here's the quote. Ambassador Sondland blurted out, well, we have an agreement with the chief of staff for a meeting if these investigations in the energy sector start. And Ambassador Bolton immediately stiffened and ended the meeting. I never thought I would hear testimony that makes John Bolton sound like a stand-up guy. And today, if you listened yesterday, I said that Bolton's lawyers had said that he's not going to testify without a court order, and that appeared to be his way out of the squeeze play between the White House and the impeachment investigation. Today, Bolton's lawyer, Charles Cooper, is dangling that John Bolton was personally involved in many of the events, meetings, and conversations about which you've already received testimony, as well as many relevant meetings and conversations that have not yet been discussed in the testimonies thus far. This sounds like Bolton desperately wants to get even with Trump. He wants to testify in the impeachment hearings. Now, this lawyer, Cooper, represents Charles Kupperman, who is the former deputy of Bolton, who also is demanding a court ruling before he will testify. And the committees have kind of passed on that because they think it's just a delaying tactic. We shall see. Meanwhile, to add a dimension of WWE or WWF, because I don't know the difference, I know that wrestling on TV is just theater, and a lot of people like it. But Jim Jordan, the Republican congressman from Columbus, Ohio, former wrestling coach at Ohio State University, has been inserted onto the Intelligence Committee by the Republican leadership in the House. And you can count on him for disruptive antics. And he also is being forced to freshly deny that while he was the wrestling coach at Ohio State, that he ignored the sexual misconduct involving the former team doctor, who's been accused of sexually abusing 300 men over a 17-year period, and Jim Jordan says he didn't know nothing about it. Ohio State is aware of 1,429 instances of fondling, 47 instances of rape involving this guy Strauss. But Jim Jordan says, no, he didn't hear anything, he didn't see anything. Most of us find that very hard to believe. Now, speaking of the impeachment hearings, they'll be starting next Wednesday. And yours truly cut his young teeth covering the Watergate hearings of Richard Nixon when I was a Cub radio host in Chicago. And at the time, PBS was a valuable source because they replayed the day's hearings during evening prime time. And no less than Bill Moyers has taken out a full-page ad in today's New York Times to nudge his former network, PBS, into doing the same thing this time. He notes that there are many people in the United States who don't have cable, who don't have the Internet, and PBS is their source. Let's see, 83% of all television households, 215 million people, watch PBS through traditional television. Rabbit ears? PBS reaches 83% of non-Internet homes, 82% of low-income homes, and 78% of rural homes. Case made, Mr. Moyers. I hope they will accede to your request. Meanwhile, Roger Stone continues on trial in Washington, D.C., and Randy Credico, who's known as a radio host, a comic, impressionist, he appears to be pretty entertaining on the stand. as he provides testimony that's pretty damaging to Roger Stone, accused of lying to Congress. Randy Credico says that he tried to get Stone to tell the truth. But apparently, Roger Stone is fundamentally incapable of doing that. So at one point, Judge Amy Berman Jackson said that Credico was a little mumbly and that he should speak up. Credico said he felt like Mumbles from the old Dick Tracy comic strip. Let me know if I do it again, he told her. He also delivered an impression of Bernie Sanders on the stand that people said was pretty good. And prosecutors warned jurors. They tried to undermine Credico because he's had problems with alcohol over the last 34 years. He says he's been sober for the past year. But if you want to get more on Randy Credico, go to gregpalast.com, because my buddy, the trench coat and fedora-wearing reporter, has known Randy for a long time. Randy shared some of Roger Stone's emails with Greg Palast. Let me read this one. From April 9th of 2018, and we just got part of this yesterday, from Roger Stone. Maybe Ari Melber, the MSNBC host, will give you some food as you slowly starve to death, but I doubt it. How does David Korn's asshole taste? Is Isikoff's dick as small as I think? Bet you have no trouble swallowing it. I doubt you can pay for dog food. I bet the city takes that dog away from you. He's got a therapy dog. See what happens when you stab your friends in the back? People hate rats and liars. You are both. So that is a threat to a witness. And it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. But Palast notes, what concerns me is that the Stone case is simply laying the groundwork for a long-term imprisonment of Julian Assange. Credico co-hosted a half-dozen radio shows with Assange, visited him in London. That Mueller hauled Credico before a grand jury to ask about his contacts with WikiLeaks should scare those of us who are trying to hold on to the last shreds of freedom of the press. So there's a little more here, and you can check it out at gregpalast.com. Now, while I was there, I was actually looking for this report because Greg Palast, who has much deeper involvement in utility regulation than I ever will, has joined me in calling for public ownership of Pacific Gas and Electric. And he calls for doing it the way Gordon Gekko did it, through a hostile takeover bid for PG&E. And in 1981, that's a long time ago, Palast probably had hair then, he was executive director of the state legislature in New York, Science and Technology Commission, and he was given the job to draft a law that would allow customers to buy out Long Island Lighting Company that had the nuclear plant on Long Island. So Lilco's stock was in the toilet, so they did a hostile takeover, and they backed it up by drafting a civil racketeering law that would prevent the utility from trying to game the transaction. And a jury awarded the beleaguered customers on Long Island $4 billion in damages, and the company ultimately sold to the state's newly created authority, and it is publicly owned and operating, and safety has improved. There's also a great piece at The Intercept today by Naomi Klein. And I'm kind of allergic to anniversary journalism, but it was a year ago today that Paradise, California burned. And I remember leaving the studio to take my afternoon walk with our dog Chloe, and the air was filled with smoke already. The fire had only been started about 6 hours before, and I'm almost 200 miles from Paradise. At any rate, Naomi Klein went there this week, and she published a great piece about neighboring Chico, the larger city that absorbed the population when Paradise burned. And there were a lot of problems, personal conflicts, philosophical conflicts. But what Klein points out is that Chico has put together its own Green New Deal. And she quotes Vice Mayor Alex Brown of Chico, "We're choosing to walk the walk of this movement, take the leadership demanded of us." He told Klein that the campfire's impact on both Paradise and Chico was a glimpse of the future unless action is taken to both radically lower carbon emissions and build communities that are more resilient to these shifts. And he says, we can demonstrate what a Green New Deal looks like at the local level. And I just made a mistake. Alex Brown is a female, and I called her a him. So now I've corrected that. My apology. Anyway, Klein notes that the state of Maine and the city of Seattle have unveiled their own Green New Deal frameworks. And Seattle has pledged to create an oversight board to make sure that commitments are adhered to. And so she also argues that Chico shows that there is no way to cope with climate breakdown without a simultaneous shift to a very different kind of economy. And that's what the corporate Democrats like Pelosi object to in the Green New Deal. It requires a fundamental transformation that many people are not prepared for. So I encourage you to read Klein's piece. Runs about 20 pages, but she makes a lot of good points, and I strongly support her arguments. Every day I pause for a moment to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And today I want to single out Joe Carson. Hillary Hamilton just renewed an annual subscription. Thank you, Hillary. Paul Karsh kicks in $5 a month, and so does Marvin Rasmussen. Why don't you, he asked. Well, as you answer that question, here is your route to fix it. Go to peterbcollins.com, find the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page, and boom. In seconds, you can pull the subscription option that is best for you. Take a $50 annual, and I've got bonus books. Yes, I still have one copy of Trump on the Couch. And I have at least 2 copies of the great book about climate change called 2100: A Dystopian Utopia. All you have to do is sign up for a new $50 annual subscription and cough up a mailing address in the continental U.S. And as always, if you don't like PayPal, you can address your correspondence to my P.O. Box, number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. Well, last night I felt like Rachel Maddow has decided that the kids who watch her TV show every night wanted to be read to sleep. And so she spent most of her show last night reading quotations from a soon-to-be-released book by a Trump administration official who apparently is still in the White House. He or she wrote a piece under the name Anonymous that was published by the New York Times about a year ago, and now there's a full-length book called A Warning from, allegedly, this same person. Now, I find it interesting to go behind the scenes, and you learn that at one point there's this gang in the White House that thought about a mass resignation. Then they decided that would only make things worse. And they talk about being the adults in the room who try to keep Trump from doing his worst. But the book is frustrating because it doesn't offer any specifics, and that's because Anonymous doesn't want to be discovered, identified. And so what you get is a lot of colorful accounts of Trump, this foolish man who can't read even a page of 3 bullet points. And they come up with all these clever ways to try to get information to him, and they reduce it to saying you got to go in and just say one thing, and then you say it over and over again until his distractions evaporate and he gets the point. So I'll order up a copy and try to read this, but since Anonymous is probably not going to be doing any interviews, that's probably where it will end. Yesterday in New York, Hillary Clinton dropped by a New York Times event to further diss Medicare for All. Now, remember that early in Bill Clinton's first term, he put his wife in charge of health care reform. She's an expert. But in 2016, she embraced the flawed Obamacare, and she's still there. When asked about Medicare for All and Elizabeth Warren's proposal, they don't even mention Bernie Sanders in this article. I'm checking to make sure what I just said is correct. And, there's no reference to Bernie here. Anyway, she's asked if Warren's proposal could pass. Would it get passed into law? No, I don't. The goal is the right goal, but she doesn't think it can pass. And as a millionaire herself, a multimillionaire, she doesn't favor the tax on wealth. Oh, that's where Bernie Sanders gets brought in, to blame him for taxing the rich. Meanwhile, one of the richest men in America is dangling a threat to enter the presidential race. Mike Bloomberg, who served 3 terms as New York mayor, he's worth $50 billion plus, wants to set up the 2020 race as the Titans of Gotham. Yes, 2 New York billionaires vie to rule the nation. Come on, Mike. Now, I support Bloomberg's efforts on gun legislation. I think he overdid it on sugary sodas, but he's fundamentally right about that. But this is the guy who promoted stop and frisk, and he is hardly a progressive. And he misreads the Times and the electorate if he enters this race. And maybe he should read Paul Krugman's column in the Times today, because Krugman, who I believe fell off the wagon when he supported Hillary Clinton in 2016, now says that these days it seems like Democratic centrists, not the progressives, are out of touch with reality. Sometimes it feels as if centrists are Rip Van Winkles who spent the last 20 years in a cave and missed everything that's happened to America and the world since the 1990s. You can see this in politics, where Joe Biden has repeatedly declared that Republicans will have an epiphany once Trump is gone and once again become reasonable people. And then he goes on into a whole rant about how they blame Europeans and European socialism and use it as a way to claim that America is better. And speaking of those billionaires, Elizabeth Warren and her wealth tax, she has released a calculator for the billionaires. The page first asks visitors if they're a billionaire. A yes answer offers a prompt to enter your net worth, with quick links available for Bloomberg, Gates, or Leon Cooperman, the hedge fund billionaire, who recently criticized Warren's tax proposals as idiocy and bull. If you click as though you're Bill Gates, wow, you've got a lot of money, it reads. Your wealth puts you in the top 0.0002% of Americans. Now you have the opportunity to invest some of it back into our society so everyone has a chance to succeed. And Bill Gates would pay $6+ billion in tax on his net worth of $107 billion. Mike Bloomberg would pay about $3 billion. Meanwhile, we're all scratching our heads, including leaders at the Pentagon, about what Trump means when he reversed the plan to take all troops out of Syria and said, well, we're going to leave some behind to secure that oil. Our oil, he says. Well, the Pentagon is trying to just ignore the claim that the U.S. is going to grab the oil. They say we're there to keep the Islamic State from grabbing the oil, and secondarily to keep Russia and Syria from grabbing Syria's oil. It's bizarre. It's unprecedented, and I don't know where it goes from here. Let's give kudos to Jason Leopold. He has had a triumph under the Freedom of Information Act. He saw a tweet from Trump July 24th, 2017, where Trump attacked the Amazon Washington Post for fabricating the facts on Trump's ending massive, dangerous, and wasteful payments to Syrian rebels fighting Assad. So Leopold has turned that around and forced the government to release documents that essentially prove what Trump said, that Obama and the CIA were making wasteful payments to Syrian rebels fighting Assad. Now, I believe that to be true. And I want to give a tip of my hat to Linda Lewis, a whistleblower herself and a loyal listener of this podcast. She notes that based on Leopold and his FOIA release of the CIA documents, that this then becomes a potential argument that the CIA whistleblower who has exposed Trump on Ukraine and the Zelensky phone call did that as reprisal for Trump's attack on the CIA. I think it's a very interesting theory. Thanks for sharing that, Linda. I'm going to be thinking about it. In Brazil, the Supreme Court announced today that Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the former president who's been in prison for several years now, I guess a year and a half, is going to be released today. Now, he has not been exonerated. Pepe Escobar, who interviewed Lula in prison about 6 weeks ago, told us that Lula was planning to stay there until he was exonerated. He may not have a choice here. The court issued a ruling that affects thousands of inmates, essentially saying that while you're appealing a conviction, you may be out of custody. Over in Britain, Jeremy Corbyn is being smeared again. Now, I don't pretend to know deeply the politics of Britain and in particular the Labour Party, but I have covered the attempts to smear the party as anti-Semitic and to blame it on Jeremy Corbyn. And they're at it again. A front-page story on a Jewish newspaper in London yesterday showed that 2 members of the Labour Party are defecting. They say they'll vote for the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, because they claim Jeremy Corbyn is unfit to be Prime Minister because he presides over an anti-Semitic party and he hasn't done anything about it. Now, he's been a strong critic of Israel, and it's in the Israeli playbook that you slime your critics by calling them anti-Semitic, and that's what's going on there. Over at the Gray Zone, a report on recent votes at the UN by Ben Norton. And there have been resolutions, for example, calling for a nuclear-free Middle East. On November 1, there was a vote. 172 countries voted in support of the resolution. Only 2 voted against it, the United States and Israel. And 2 abstained, the United Kingdom and Cameroon. And likewise, when they voted out a resolution to ban the deployment of weapons in space, nearly all UN member states voted to keep the, space free of weapons. And so we see once again the lockstep of the U.S. and Israel. And now Netanyahu, who is on his knees, facing indictment. The opposition has been asked to form a government because he couldn't. But yesterday, he took a report from the International Atomic Energy Agency and claimed that it validated his long-standing arguments that Iran has been maintaining a secret nuclear site in violation of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, the IAEA did not actually confirm that. But Mike Pompeo, who plays Secretary of State in this reality show called The Trump Administration, he chimed in. And both of them claim that this is the reason why everybody in Europe should back out of the nuclear agreement with Iran. It was false before, and it is still false. Trump today just added more confusion to his self-inflicted trade war with China. Yesterday, we told you how he tweeted congratulations to stock market shareholders because he had made the market go up. Well, today the market didn't decline much, but he still changed his tune, and he ruled out rolling back all of the tariffs that he has imposed on China and said he hasn't decided what will happen next. Earlier this week, I praised Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii and Democratic presidential candidate, and I played clips of her speech to a group of 9/11 family members. And the inevitable smears have surfaced already. This one from Huffington Post, and the arbiter of 9/11 facts is Akbar Shahid Ahmed. And Mr. Ahmed is full of shit. The headline reads, Tulsi Gabbard floats 9/11 conspiracy theory. She did no such thing. She demanded that the truth be revealed. Quote, we deserve all the information on 9/11. But Mr. Ahmed says that we already know everything, and his opening sentence accuses her. Tulsi Gabbard wants Americans to believe that their government has concealed the truth about the September 11th attacks. Well, if you don't know about the cover-up, Ahmed, you don't deserve to be writing for even a lousy outlet like the Huff Post. And so, in this smear job, he walks through the 9/11 Commission without noting just how much of a whitewash that was. And he tries to make it seem like Tulsi Gabbard is crazy, not only for this, but, because she met with Assad and has done other things that don't meet with approval of institutional Americans who embrace the 9/11 narrative. Here's another quote. She's trying to make Islamist terror a focus of the Democratic primary, reminding voters that there was something there to be afraid of. I don't know. It's just a really bad smear. Finally, today, for your weekend read, I want to recommend the latest from Danny Sherson at TomDispatch.com. This is a very personal piece, and Danny explains how after he served in Iraq and Afghanistan, he got a perch teaching history at West Point, where he had graduated from. And now he says, watching my students turn into soldiers of empire moved him to tears in his final class at West Point. Like I say, it's a very personal piece, a very strong one, and I really respect Danny Sherson for sharing it with the world. Thanks for joining me today and listening all the way through to my daily news and comment podcast. You'll find it on YouTube. You're free to share it with absolutely everyone. And I remain Peter B. Collins. I'll be off Monday, by the way.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.